Hello everyone. Remember that FPS from the last video? It's multiplayer now. The game is a competitive horde mode, inspired by the way Tetris does multiplayer. In competitive Tetris, each player has their own playfield and never directly interacts with the other player. But when they clear lines, they send junk lines to their opponent, and the goal is to outlive the other player. So, in the first-person shooter, each person is playing in their own instance of the level, but every time they kill an enemy, it gets sent to the other player, with extra enemies sent every so many kills. I'd like to point out that I had this idea as far back as 2016, building something like it in Doom 2016's snap map called Competitive Survival. I only point this out because, no, I'm not just making Mario 35 in an FPS, with only 2 players. So, to begin with, I made a new enemy. I wanted a tanky melee enemy. I happen to have this fully animated meatball monster from the other game, so he got the gig. I created a very low-range hit scan weapon for the bite, and used the same script for the human baddie. I recorded a few screams and roars, layered them on top of each other, and played with the pitch and equalization to create this monster roar. Next up, we needed a spawn system. Now, normally a spawn system will spawn enemies in waves or over time, but due to the competitive horde mode, I went for a system that is based entirely on your kills, where every number of kills a new enemy is spawned in. So, I created blueprints that have a reference to the enemy they will spawn, and the number that indicates how many kills are required to spawn this enemy. I created spawn points that hold a queue of enemies to spawn, and the exact spawn location. And finally, I made the overall monster manager that keeps track of kills, scans the blueprints for something to spawn, and sends a monster to the appropriate spawn point. At this point, with no multiplayer, the spawn system just spawned enemies in your game when you killed them. Which proved it worked, but if you just hid in a corner and didn't kill anything, nothing spawned in, so it definitely became time for some multiplayer. I studied up the documentation and watched a few tutorials to learn how Godot's eNet implementation works. In about a day, I got 2 instances of the game sending monsters to each other, but it was probably about time I implemented a heads-up display, so players can see their health as well as their opponent's health and name. I asked a voice actor friend of mine to record some enemy barks, pain and death sounds, and made a couple of monster sounds for the meatball. I sped up the fire rate of the gun, and that's mostly it. I took a day to fix up some issues. For example, the host would be able to get a head start before the other player joined, so I made the host's game restart as soon as the player joined, and the game wasn't detecting when a player left the game, so I made it so the games ping each other every other second, and timeout after 5 failed pings, changing the enemy player name to disconnected so at least the player will know why nothing's spawning in. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out how to get around routers in Godot. I mean, obviously port forwarding works, and that's how I'm testing for me, but most gamers today don't know what a port forward is, so I'll have to figure out something out there before I can release the game. But apart from that, I'm very happy with the gameplay and the overall feel of the game, especially how the nature of the multiplayer works means that ping isn't that big an issue, as each client handles all its own game logic, only pinging over new monsters to spawn and the player health. And if those packages arrive a little late, you probably won't notice. Anyway, that is the game. I still need to figure out what the heck I'm going to call it. Shooty Shoot works as a working title, but I really don't want to stick with that. As usual, if you liked the video, please leave a comment, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.